And our panelists will help with those questions, and we would like to keep quite a few of those questions and observations for the second half of the session as well. So we hope that we can engage with you, pull out some of your experiences and some of the thoughts and perhaps challenges that you have as a profession, and see what we can do to shine some light on those. So you can use the Q&A, as I say, or you can use the chat box if there's anything you want to raise more immediately. My colleagues both in the UK and the US are with us today. So we have Luke and Chris in the US, and we also have my colleague Chris here in the UK as well. So we'll, as I say, be able to answer your questions either directly, or if they are exciting enough, we'll save them for the end and address them to everyone in the room. Hope that's okay with you all. So let's get started and explore this subject together. So just really to introduce EdApp, let's talk a little bit around that if we can for a second. If you're new to EdApp, if this is the first time you've come across us as an organisation, then you may or may not know that we are a micro-learning business. We are an organisation that provides a new way, a different way to deliver learning across the workplace. We are able to provide you with a trial to try that service for yourself, have a look at a different way of applying digital learning to the workplace. This presentation will be available to you all after, so don't feel that you have to make lots of notes. We'll be sending this presentation out to everyone, as well as the opportunity to start a 30-day trial of the EdApp micro-learning system. The link to the free account is also posted there, as you can see. So if you do want to make a note of that, you can do, but fear not, we'll be sending all of this out to you later on. So as I mentioned, as an organisation, we have 3 offices. We've already talked about our UK and our US offices in New York and London. We also have our head office in Sydney. And we've been providing digital learning platforms now to organisations for in excess of 5 years. We offer 24/7 support, of course, as you would expect for an organisation that is spread right across the world. But we also we support our learners in lots of different ways. We're currently in a situation where we are providing somewhere in the region of 40,000 lessons to individuals every day. So that's there's a lot of training going on within the EdApp ecosystem. And of course, if you'd like to find out more about that, we can talk to you further about that. But the main reason we're here today is to talk about the changing landscape of L&D, particularly around technology, and how technology can be harnessed to actually support the L&D function. So I've seen from registration, the people that are registered and attending today, that we've got lots of learning professionals from many different types and size of organisation. I think what binds us all together is the fact that demands on what we provide to our learning communities have changed and hugely increased over the past 20 years. When at one time, learning departments were targeted with how many courses were run and how many people attended those courses, we now need a wide range of technical and soft skills to ensure that we deliver a blended modern learning strategy. And some of you will no doubt be familiar with some of the services that you're expected to provide, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. But through talking to learning professionals, we know that whilst not individually, they may not be expected to have all of these skills. They are expected to be able to author digital learning content, to curate content from everywhere else around the world, to perform data analysis on the outcomes of many different types of learning intervention, to be subject matter experts wherever possible, but also, again, in a digital learning format, to have user experience and user interface expertise as well. So we're asking an awful lot of an L&D department. And in fact, if we look at some of the skills that have been identified as being required for the modern learning and development department. We see exactly how much is being put onto people. So the Learning and Performance Institute, which is a European learning industry body, which has many members, many thousands of members right around the world, not just in Europe. The Institute has identified that there are 25 key skills required within the modern learning organisation that are there to really meet the demands of the learners. And so this is a survey of thousands of learning professionals around the world, identifying where gaps are in our readiness, if you like, as a profession to meet the demands of the modern learning organisation. As you'll see from this chart, obviously we've taken a top and bottom from their own data. A lot of what you might call the more traditional skills are, of course, they're in high supply. So things like the ability to facilitate face-to-face learning and designing and developing solutions, particularly classroom solutions or overall learning campaigns, are very high. However, all of these skills, of course, are seen as equally important in delivering a full service learning and development department. So those traditional skills aren't the only ones that are demanded of us nowadays. So if we accept that we require all of those, then what do we need to do to ensure that we can help with our data analysis, that we can help with the marketing, which is one of the key success factors of any learning campaign across organisations, both big and small. How do we make sure that people know that there's a learning solution out there and that they're kept up to date with how it can help them perform their role more effectively? On top of this, some research that was done by Statista identified that there are somewhere around one learning and development employee per 300 staff in a typical organisation. So let's round that up and say sort of 3 learning and development employees across every 1,000 staff. And if we accept there are at least a dozen skill sets, at least, and we're talking more about 25 compared when we talk about what the LPI is suggesting, that the average learning and development department needs to adopt or strengthen, can we truly address them all in this fast-paced environment? Is it possible when we just have a handful of learning and development people in what you might call the typically sized organisation? Is it possible to actually address all of the demands that are placed upon us? And where the latest technological demands are also likely to move the goalposts for us on a regular basis, because we all know, I'm sure, that we've seen and had experiences of this, where the rate of change in learning and development, especially in learning technology, is rapid. And there doesn't seem to be a day goes by where there isn't a new acronym to learn or a new set of standards to work towards. So how does the average department have the bandwidth to develop all of these skills? That's one of the questions that we really like to address today. And let's just talk perhaps a little bit about this rate of change a bit further. Oops. We are entering, and some would say we're right in the middle now of the fourth industrial revolution. So agility is key, and experts tell us that globally, over 800 million, and let that number just sink in for a minute, over 800 million jobs are due to be lost to embracing the fourth industrial revolution. And that's through artificial intelligence, through automation, and that's in the next 10 to 15 years. So in a very short period of time, we expect over 800 million jobs to go. And that's something to consider, certainly for our own roles, but more importantly, with the roles of the organisations that we work towards. But it's also expected that a similar number of new jobs with, frighteningly, skills that we cannot yet fully understand or predict are likely to be created in the same time period. Of course, to feed that next industrial revolution, to feed the growth of the AI economy, the automation economy, we're going to need a whole new raft of skills. And while some of those are identified, some of them are yet to be identified. So with this lightning pace of change, is it time to start looking at how we automate or simplify, or at the very least, remove some of the burdens of the many, many functions that we're expected as learning and development professionals to perform? So that's some of the background. We're interested to find out, and this is an opportunity to drop your thoughts and comments into the chat room or into the Q&A, and we'll address some of these with our panelists and hopefully pick up with some of you directly as well later on. But I'd like to give you a scenario to try and put this into context. In light of what we've been saying about the amount of capabilities, the amount of roles and functions and skills that we're required to have as a learning and development department, what are the blockers that come up to us when we are presented with a requirement to support the business in some way, to drive change, to make sure that we remain competitive? I'll give you an example here, and you can probably see the example on the screen already, as a typical scenario that we've seen our clients face, where as a retail business, they've needed to release new products to remain competitive. Again, we're sort of talking back to that rate of change that we've discussed already, where in a cutthroat industry, in a very fast-moving industry, to release a new product range before your competitors can be a matter of days, weeks at most. So I'd ask you to drop your thoughts in here, and we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. But if you needed to know that all your employees, all of your dispersed employees, had received and absorbed training that you perhaps had only been told needed to be dispersed 2 weeks previously, how would your organisation react, and where would the blockers be, if there would be any? So I've given you some examples, some food for thought, but there may well be some others there, and we'd really love to see you sharing some of those perhaps personal experiences or what you might see as the blockers within your own organisation. And I'll just explain those a little further as well, because we've used shorthand for some of those. But authoring, for example, if you are providing a digital learning solution, which is, let's be fair, most likely given the timescale and the dispersed nature of the workforce, the authoring of e-learning, do you have the skills within the organisation to do that? Are there people trained in your authoring tool of choice? And not only are there the people, but obviously it's the time there as well. Because we know that authoring traditional e-learning content, if we can call it that, is not something that comes quickly. It does require planning, and it does usually require a considerable number of person hours to get that completed. However, if you are an organisation that doesn't have that skill in-house and you require outsourcing, would a sudden requirement for training crash the budget? Would there be an issue with outsourcing that type of content because you don't have the skills in-house? So would the cost cause a problem for you to react quickly? But let's say you've managed to create some form of learning resources. Would the blocker then be how you get that out to people quickly, how you get people engaged, how you motivate them to complete the content, to engage with the content? And we've put a couple of other examples in there, and I'd love to obviously hear from people that wouldn't be challenged by any of those, because I'm sure there are organisations that have got that capability and the ability to react quickly within their locker. But it'd be very interesting to hear if any of you identify those as typical challenges, or whether there are others that we haven't talked about previously. And I'd like then just to expand perhaps with one further question. If we look back at the automation challenge and the fact that the skills of the future perhaps are slightly unwritten at the moment, it'd be great for you to share some of your thoughts with us on what learning and development skills that we're currently expected to have in our locker. Which of those skills will be automated in the future? We've seen already that many traditional roles that we expect to be able to be around forever are being automated. I saw yesterday an AI sales interface which removed probably 75% of a traditional salesperson's job. And that future is now. So if those roles that are traditionally people-skilled roles are no longer safe from automation, what do we think perhaps the L&D skills that will be automated in the future are? And what do we need to make easier now? So if we're preparing for the future, if we're preparing for the need to be much more agile in our delivery of learning, and our delivery of learning campaigns, what do we need to do to clear some of those blockers? What do we need to have at our disposal? Not necessarily suggesting that it be money no object, but what would we need to have at our fingertips to make that job easier for us now? So if you can give us your thoughts on that, I can see people are dropping some questions and some chats in there now, so that'll be great to come back to some of those later on. Okay, so as I'm sure you would expect, we have a view on this as an organisation that has helped companies in this particular scenario. So if we look at the retail, whilst we won't name any names, that retail example that we mentioned earlier is a typical example of where an organisation like EdApp can help. So we'd like to talk now for a little bit around the possibilities of using a micro-learning solution, give you some food for thought around this, and as I said, sort of bounce some further ideas around with you. So we'll spend the next 15 minutes or so exploring that, which will then still give us plenty of time for further discussion towards the end. The first thing that EdApp does as an organisation is democratise the creation of learning. That's a key point for us, is to enable companies to rapidly deploy high quality learning content to a dispersed workforce in hours rather than weeks, or days rather than months. One of the big challenges that we talked about is that authoring bandwidth, if you like, the pinch points around creating content. And the EdApp approach has dramatically changed how learning is fed out to the workforce. We've created an authoring ecosystem, an authoring and delivery ecosystem that doesn't require technical expertise, that has the instructional design pre-built, that enables you to create learning content very quickly through a series of templated designs. This will then provide you with an agile approach to creating learning campaigns that enables you to move quickly, to start getting learning out to people in a very short order, to be able to add to that and to keep people engaged in that. And we'll show you a couple of very brief examples of how that works. And obviously, if you'd like to find more, then we can arrange to give you a fuller demonstration towards the end. But this is the key thing that through my time working in this industry is the ability to, as I say, democratize the creation of learning, make it simpler for more subject matter experts that don't necessarily have the coding skills to create content and create a much more agile environment. If you're doing that, then if you're making the creation of learning much simpler, if you're making the creation of learning content quicker and not relying perhaps on people that have deep-seated coding skills, then perhaps this would also reduce your reliance on the outsourcing of creation of digital learning assets. We have seen with a lot of organisations that perhaps only have 2 or 3 people managing learning and development across many hundreds, if not thousands of employees, that they have to very quickly turn to outsourcing, which of course is costly and also means that you're relying on someone else's timescales rather than your own. So providing this approach, this much easier and simpler approach to creating content that still hits the mark and still provides engagement is going to reduce the reliance on outsourcing. So we're going to provide you with a quick demo, and we're going to touch on a couple of areas. Rapid authoring that we've already talked about, and actually just as a little bonus, we'd like to talk about one of the other areas that can cause sleepless nights, especially for those of you that are responsible for multi-language audiences, and that's the translation of learning. Because what we see typically is the challenge of providing or justifying the cost of translating courses into other languages, where there may only be a small percentage of non-English speaking employees, or just making them use the course in the language that you've created it in. So we can touch on both of those issues in this brief demonstration. So I've dropped us straight into the administrator and authoring interface of EdApp, just to enable you to see exactly how simple it is to create content. And this will be, as I say, a brief demonstration just to give you a feel for the simplicity of our approach. So I'm in a course creation environment at the moment. I've, in true demo fashion, I've started to create something already, and I'd like to share with you how simple it is to continue that creation. So our approach, as I say, is to remove a lot of the heavy coding skills, the heavy lifting around the creation of content, without removing the core instructional design that sits behind it. So as you've seen previously, we have a huge templated library of possible scenarios, possible learning scenarios to draw upon. This is a retail example, perhaps as we talked about previously. If we imagine that we're in a fast food retail environment and we need to remain competitive with our coffee, then this might be exactly the sort of content that we would create as part of the learning campaign. So on the left-hand side, you can see here, we've got an example of how the learning will look. As we've mentioned, this is micro-learning. This is app-driven learning that people can access via an app on their phone or tablet. We've created a what you see is what you get environment here, so that as an author, you know exactly what your learners are going to be presented with. This is a 5-page learning intervention, very simple. We have also the ability, and we built the ability into this particular lesson, for people to upload their own content so that they can reflect back to everyone else in the learning community how they perform a task. That's something we can touch on with each of you individually for those that are interested in creating social learning or peer-based learning. But what I wanted to do here was actually get my hands dirty and create some additional content for this particular lesson. So as you saw in my slide previously, here I am in the templates. I can create any type of interaction that I want to with the vast amount of templates. So for example, here I'm going to use a multi-choice image. I'm going to very quickly create some learning from scratch here. I'm just going to put 2 images in. And you can see as I'm doing that, in fact, I put the same image in twice there, but that's no problem, because I'm going to put a 3rd one in here. You can see as an author, you're creating content, that enables you to see exactly how it will be presented to the learner as we go. So I'm creating a super simple question here, which is it currently says which is the correct product. I'll change that to which is the incorrect serving. And this will be my answer for what the incorrect serving is. So immediately I've created a learning intervention that I can test within seconds. So to build, of course, you can see that's the 30 seconds there, and I'm no barista, I'm no expert on pouring coffee, but you can see there that you can create learning very quickly and build the complexity up through that vast array of templates that we have. With the organisations that work with us, we typically see people creating micro-learning interventions of 5 or 6 minutes in length, usually sort of 10 to 12 slides that are a mixture of delivering information through audio, video, text, imagery, etc., and also testing and exploring and stretching that information further through the different types of interaction that we have, be it game-based or question-based, as you've seen there. So that's a very quick introduction to authoring, but we can take that one step further because we also talked around the idea of translation. So where typically translation would require some third-party input and some delay, this course that I've just created on pouring coffee can be very quickly adapted to another language. So we have built in AI translation into our learning ecosystem to enable you to take your entire course content and automatically translate using cloud translation services that have machine learning at the heart of them, and translate those courses in the blink of an eye. So I'm going to translate this into, let's translate it into French. So this is real time. There's no smoke and mirrors behind this. I now have a course that is suitable for a French audience. And I can drop in there and I can see exactly again how the learner would see it as well. So very quickly, we can create content, as I mentioned, that is suitable for all of our audiences, and we can adapt adapt and change and be agile with those learning campaigns. As you've seen from that brief example. We'll touch on just one more example in a second. I can see we've got some questions going through and hopefully some of the immediate answers are coming through. But we'll touch on just a couple of further examples as we go now. So if you just allow me to go back to my slides. So one of the other challenges that we talked about, one of those blockers that we asked in that question a few minutes ago was how do we deal with motivation? How do we deal with the marketing of content? Now, probably since the dawn of e-learning or web-based training, depending how far back you go, computer-based training, marketing and engagement has been one of the challenges. We see with organisations that we work with that have a traditional e-learning approach, if we can call it such a thing, typically for non-mandatory courses, for things that aren't necessarily compliance-based, for example, will have an engagement rate of 20 to 30%. And we've also seen, through taking a more personalised micro-learning approach, those engagement rates go up into the 80s and 90% as well. There are case studies available for that if you'd like us to follow up on any of those stats. And some of that is down to marketing and how you motivate learners to remain engaged with the learning platform. Now, because we have this mobile first philosophy, because everything we do is designed to utilize the user interface of the mobile device, push notifications are a key part of that. Some studies have been done over time. Obviously, lots of marketing studies have been done by any organization that has an app as to how much impact push notifications have. A lot of organizations will see 4 times the response for push notifications that they will be for email. And if email was previously your main route of engaging learners in the content that you created, then providing 4 times the impact is surely something that will rapidly raise engagement. We've seen studies, in fact MailChimp did some studies as well, and they saw 7 times a greater open and engage rate with push notifications than they did with email. Now, of course, there are some caveats around that. We wouldn't expect to be receiving push notifications perhaps at 5 o'clock in the morning, whereas it's fine to receive an email at 5 o'clock in the morning because we go in and open our laptops up at 8 or whatever it might be, and it hasn't disturbed us. So there are obviously still some processes that one should adhere to. But again, what we'd like to do is just show you how simply it is to communicate with your learner audience. So just jumping back in then to the authoring tool. As I say, this is an authoring and administration ecosystem. We can create groups of users and communicate with them accordingly, and we can create the appropriate messages for the appropriate audiences. So a push notification will have a title, and then it will have a body of text. The accepted wisdom is that you're looking for text around sort of 50 to 60 characters, so you need to be succinct. Of course, we live in a world where short messages are very powerful, so it's expected to be able to communicate in a short period of time. But these are some of the examples that you might use to engage with your audience. If you're creating a new lesson, and let's go back to that retail example that we talked about earlier, what better way to get people to be engaging in the learning that has been created for them by sending a notification direct to their screen that within 1 click it enables them to engage with the learning. Not only that, of course, we do recognise that that not everyone is as motivated to learn as others, and the intelligence behind the analytics of the EdApp system enables us to create a range of what we call actionable reports, and that provides us with the ability to group people into behaviours, if you like, into certain action types. So we can send congratulatory push notifications, or more of a sort of nudge-based, hey, there's some content that you haven't looked at for a while, let's get you involved, let's get you back into the course and get you enjoying the learning. So any of those, and I'm sure you can all imagine, there are different learner profiles to think about, but any of those behaviours can have the most appropriate lesson sent to them. And we can engage people further as well with the push notification capability. I'll give you one further example, and then we'll perhaps open the floor to some of the questions. So let's just go back to our So push technology also enables us to keep people engaged with learning for longer. So part of that motivation to complete, ensuring that we are remaining competitive, ensuring that we're remaining agile. This will, in effect, kind of wrap up this approach by talking about spaced repetition. So learning programs quite often are delivered quickly because they need to be delivered quickly, but then the follow-up perhaps doesn't really hit the mark. So with the EdApp system, we enable you to remain engaged with your learners through spaced repetition, what we call Brain Boost. And Brain Boost is a way of taking the information that we receive back from our learners. It's a way of identifying what people are absorbing, what people are demonstrating that they've retained, and perhaps what they're not necessarily understanding first time around, and then feeding that back to them in a daily quiz in the most appropriate manner. So I'm sure all amongst the L&D community here, there's a lot of people that are familiar with the forgetting curve. This is a great example of how to minimize the impact of what's called the forgetting curve or knowledge decay. So in the short term, we can reinforce perhaps the learning content that hasn't necessarily been understood first time around. And then in the longer term, we can reinforce the things that have been understood, but are at risk of being forgotten just through the passage of time. So utilising that approach is for us one of the missing pieces with a lot of learning campaigns, and that's that keeping people engaged and keeping them involved in the process much beyond the initial learning engagement. And we mentioned this at the end. We talked about peer learning. We mentioned this earlier on. And we feel that certainly in organisations where we have a dispersed workforce and a range of experiences, that creating the ability to have this socialised learning is a key part of the package. So you'll see, again, this is something that we can explore with you individually, but you'll see that the impact of providing learners with the ability to feedback their learning, feedback their knowledge to their communities, creates massive engagement and massive motivation for people to remain connected. And again, as I say, we can explore that further with you individually. But I feel perhaps we've maybe talked for enough time, and it would be great to get some of your feedback. And Luke, I don't know from our office in the US if you've got some great questions or some great observations that have come through.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking us through there, Steve. Hi, everyone. Quick intro. My name is Luke Rowan, and I'm here in the US on the West Coast. So let's have a look at some of the feedback. So I'll rewind back to our questions page where we asked what sorts of skills would you be looking for in the future or be expecting to be automated? And the second question was, what skills are you actually needing right now? So rewinding to some of the feedback that we saw, we had one person talk to us about the need for automated onboarding. And obviously, as we've discussed, not only producing the learning, but seeding it out to an audience is quite a challenge. And that challenge obviously tends to grow as with the size of the audience that you're talking to as well. So the need for kind of platform services and functionality that makes that easy is very critical, and we completely understand that. So just quickly talking about how we currently address that, and also some insight as to where we're going in the future with easing the burden of onboarding. So at the moment, some of you would be familiar with the fact that we have a couple of tactics to allow for the actual enrollment or subscription of users on the platform. Firstly, speaking to the efforts or the features that are available that don't require any integration. So we have two methods. We have two simple methods. The first is simply using invite codes. So those are unique invite codes that can be set up and delivered to individual user groups, and that will, in fact, using those invite codes, designate specific courseware to an individual learner. Obviously, that would require you to to circulate those invite codes. So it's not absolutely automated, but it is quite an easy way to be able to hand out some specific kind of codes or invites and put people in the right place. The second method that's not an integration would be just simply inviting people via email. And there, with our system, you can upload a batch of emails via CSV file, and that will then send out the relative invites out to everyone that you've included in your learning campaign. So now just quickly talking to the automated process. So we do currently have available single sign-on, and that will obviously, when that is set up, that'll allow your learners to be able to access our platform. And when that is actually combined with the feature that we have called dynamic user groups, we can then begin to start not only enrolling users into the app with ease, but then placing them into specific user groups based upon their department and their role. And then as those attributes change in your internal systems, they can then talk to EdApp and begin to change the types of courseware that they're seeing on our platform. And we really think that that's a great way to lessen the burden on an admin's need to be able to designate courseware and follow the pathway of a learner from when they first begin on the platform to then moving through into other roles and therefore seeing other learning. So those both single sign-on and dynamic user groups are currently available on the platform. And with a little bit of integration work, they can certainly help you out to move your learners through quite seamlessly and quite quickly. Speaking to another point in terms of a suggestion for kind of easing the burden on L&D departments today, the point was mentioned about authoring, and Steve has kind of outlined some basic authoring features that we have today that we're really kind of hoping make authoring quite rapid and allow you to be able to publish content and actually deploy it out to learners in really rapid fashion. Speaking further to that, if any of you joined us for one of the recent webinars on data-driven authoring, you would know that we have a whole range of focuses at the moment to be able to really build upon that authoring experience and use data to be able to really feed back to you guys as authors and give you meaningful guidance on how to build out effective microlearning. And at this point, we have a whole range of features surrounding offering suggestions for templates, showing you which are the most popular templates in our system. And that kind of gives you the idea of how the community is really valuing and different templates and what people are using. But going forward, we really hope to expand on that. And we're looking at things like using artificial intelligence to be able to suggest templates. So that would mean scenarios, for example, if you were to upload a series of templates in a micro lesson, we would then use AI to begin to suggest what the end of that micro lesson might look like, for example. And that will give you the ability to be able to create microlearning in even more rapid fashion, which is exciting. Okay, I'll have a further look at the questions here.
Can I perhaps just, can I just touch on one which I thought was quite interesting actually, from Marlena. who are sometimes, she said, sometimes we find it beneficial for users to take a class together as a group with a facilitator. Is there a way to log a training event with users in EdApp? So EdApp doesn't provide classroom event logging as such, but what would be a great use case there is to actually build content that can be used to support either in the classroom or sort of post-classroom. And we see a lot of clients doing this, getting together and you know, building some learning content that can be used as a bit of fun, using perhaps some of the gamification elements in the classroom, but then using that as follow-up post-event. So you can tie the two together, and you can certainly tie the, if you like, the knowledge transfer and the test of that knowledge transfer into a classroom event. And you know, whilst we never see the classroom going away, we're of course seeing much more reliance on a sort of blended learning approach now. And this is a classic example of how, you know, technology can add value to those sort of classroom facilitated events or sort of group coaching events, such as Marlena mentioned. So hoping that's a useful answer for you, Marlena. Sorry, Luke, I don't know if I stole I got so excited by that question. I thought I'd dive straight in with it. But if anyone else has any questions or any observations, it'd be great to hear from you. We'll obviously follow up with you all individually afterwards, and provide you with the recording of this session. And as we say, the ability, if you don't already have it, to sign up to the EdApp microlearning trial so that you can experience what we've done in a bit more depth. Thank you, Marlena, for your response to that. I'm glad we answered your question satisfactorily.